Karen stormed onto my lawn, yelling that our porch flag violated HOA rules. My wife didn't say a word, she just stepped outside in her JAG Corps uniform. Minutes later, the sheriff was pulling up, and Karen had no idea how badly this was about to backfire. They came for the flag before they even introduced themselves. Karen was already at the edge of the lawn, floral blouse, sensible shoes, face flushed like she'd swallowed lemon, before I finished unlocking the front gate. Her voice cut across the cul-de-sac like someone throwing a stone into a quiet pond. "You need to take that flag down," she shouted, fingers stabbing the air toward the porch where our stars and stripes hung from a polished pole. "HOA rule, it's an eyesore." I stopped, keys in hand, and looked at the flag. The cotton rippled in the late afternoon breeze, the blue field bright against the soft beige of the house. It had been there since Memorial Day. It wasn't loud or oversized, just deliberate and honest. Behind me, the screen door clicked as my wife paused halfway through tying her apron. She heard Karen too. Everyone in the neighborhood heard when Karen arrived with thunder in her voice. "Karen," I said, trying to keep my tone even because we'd been through petty disagreements with neighbors before and escalation never helped. "We checked the HOA rules. Nothing about a flag like this." Karen scoffed. "Of course you think that. You're always looking for loopholes." She dialed a number on her phone like a practiced ritual. The HOA president, the neighborhood watch captain, who knew. "I'm calling the board right now," she said into the phone. "They'll tell you." The confrontation landed fast, an opening salvo that set every hair on my arms to attention. She treated it like the end of civilization. A few neighbors paused their work, peering over hedges. Mr. Adams from next door stood on his stoop with his coffee, eyes narrowed. The square of lawn and the fluttering flag suddenly felt like a public stage. "Do you have any idea what that pole is doing to the symmetry of the facade?" she demanded. "The covenants are clear about visual uniformity." "We respect the neighborhood," I said. "I respect the covenants. But the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act. You're going to throw federal law at this?" Karen interrupted like I had insulted her. "This isn't about the flag. It's about respect. If you want to fly a banner, do it at a park." My wife walked out slowly from the screen door. She was still pulling her hair into a clip, flour on the side of her apron from the pie she'd been finishing. Up close you could see the way she moved. Precise, measured, the kind of motion that suggested command without needing noise. She stepped onto the top porch step and folded her hands. Then she straightened her back and the mood shifted. "Afternoon, Karen," my wife said, voice level and clear. "Is there a problem?" Karen turned as if struck. "Do you mind? I'm speaking to the homeowner." Her voice quivered between indignation and the brittle triumph of someone who believes rules are an extension of their own power. "Yes, you are," my wife said. "And I live here too." There was no snarl, just a statement. A neighbor 2 houses over muttered, perhaps in relief. "That flag violates HOA code. I'm telling you, you have to remove it immediately or face a fine. The board will not tolerate." "There are laws governing this, Karen." I tried again. "There's federal protection for flag display. We called before we hung it. We went through the right channels." Karen's eyes flashed. "You people always think rules don't apply to you. This town has standards." Her voice sharpened with the phrase that is quietly weaponized in neighborhoods, "People like you." It hung there like a dare. Beneath the shouting, suburban noises continued. A sprinkler clicking, a child's scooter, a distant lawnmower. Ordinary life circled the edges of the confrontation like a calm soundtrack, refusing to be swallowed whole. Karen's phone conversation grew louder. Someone on the other end said something and she repeated it back to me like gospel. "The HOA president said he'll be right over," she proclaimed, pleased at the speed of her own escalation. "If you don't take that flag down now, I'll have him enforce the covenants and you'll be fined." We'd had run-ins with Karen before, small things that escalated because she preferred the role of arbiter. Once she objected to a mailbox decal, another time she insisted a hedgerow be trimmed to her exact measurement. Each time she spoke with the certainty of someone who believes rules exist to affirm personal taste. That made her dangerous in a small-town way, not violent but persistent. Neighbors tolerated her because she often began with the appearance of civic care. Today felt different because the thing at stake was more symbolic than a mailbox or a hedge. A flag hangs under sunlight and memory. It folds into rituals of grief and gratitude. I thought of my grandfather who'd been careful with his words about duty, who pressed a small bronze paperweight into my hand with the admonition, "Know when to stand and when to speak." I wasn't sure which the moment required. My wife's eyes softened for a second. Then she folded her hands and spoke calmly. If you would please wait until the HOA president arrives, we can discuss the bylaws and any concerns. I want to resolve this civilly. Karen huffed like a kettle. I don't wait. I don't have time to discuss. You have 5 minutes to take that flag down or I'm calling the cops. For a moment the street held its breath. People glanced at each other, measuring who would step in, who would glance away. A small thing could become a big story if everyone allowed it to. I stepped forward. We're not taking it down, I said. We'll talk to the board, but the flag is staying. Karen's eyes narrowed. Fine. I'll call the police. 5 minutes later, the sound of polished shoes on concrete broke the tense quiet. The HOA president, Mr. Whitaker, approached with the stiff stride of a man who had spent decades being listened to, or at least expecting to be. He was in his mid-60s, tall, with a neatly ironed polo tucked into pressed khakis, carrying a thin manila folder tucked under his arm. Karen's whole posture shifted the moment she saw him. Chin raised, shoulders straight, righteous smile blooming. Thank goodness you're here, Don, she said loud enough for the neighbors to hear. These people are openly violating our bylaws, and they're refusing to take down that flag. Whitaker didn't immediately look at us. He looked at the flag first, then at Karen, then at the small crowd forming along the street. He seemed aware that he was walking into a performance. I have the covenants right here, he said, flipping open the folder and producing a few printed pages with highlighted sections. Section 8, subsection D. No exterior decorative fixtures that disrupt uniformity of the neighborhood's visual profile shall be erected without board approval. Karen nodded vigorously like a parishioner agreeing with scripture. Whitaker turned to me, extending the paper. You didn't submit an architectural review committee request for this flagpole, he said evenly. I took the paper, scanning the highlighted section, and handed it back. That section doesn't mention flags, Don. And even if it did, there's federal law that overrides HOA rules when it comes to the U.S. flag. He frowned slightly. Yes, I'm aware of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act, he said, with the air of a man explaining something to a child. But that doesn't mean homeowners can just install anything without permission. It means you can't prohibit me from flying the flag, I said, careful not to raise my voice. The law is clear. By now, 3 more neighbors had stepped outside, some with phones in hand. It wasn't every day you got live HOA drama with this many witnesses. I noticed a teenager across the street subtly filming. This was going to end up on TikTok before sunset. Behind me, I heard the screen door creak open again. This time my wife stepped out fully, but not in her apron. She had changed quickly and efficiently. The soft click of her heels on the porch would carried as she emerged wearing her pressed JAG Corps Army uniform. Her ribbons in perfect alignment, nameplate shining in the golden light. Her posture was tall, composed, and radiated an authority that needed no words. The effect was immediate. The murmurs from the neighbors went quiet. Whitaker blinked once, his hand lowering the paper slightly. Karen's mouth opened, then snapped shut. Afternoon, my wife said, voice calm and measured. She didn't raise her voice, but somehow the whole street seemed to hear her. I'm Captain Reynolds, Judge Advocate General's Corps, United States Army. This flag isn't coming down. Karen's face turned a deeper shade of red. You can't just, this isn't the Army. This is a neighborhood. That's correct, my wife said, taking a step forward to the edge of the porch, but federal law applies in neighborhoods too. For the first time, Whitaker looked unsettled. No one's trying to disrespect the flag, Captain, he said carefully, the stiffness draining from his tone. We just want to maintain order. This is order, my wife said. She didn't raise her voice, but the quiet steel in it made the words ring out. Your HOA is not above federal law. Section 4 of the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act prohibits you from enforcing any covenant that restricts the display of the flag. You may regulate reasonable placement for safety, but this is mounted according to code on private property. Karen let out a bitter laugh. Oh, you're really going to stand there and lecture us about code? This is intimidation. She's using her uniform to bully us. It's not intimidation to inform you of the law, my wife said evenly. It's my duty. The air felt electric. A few neighbors began quietly siding with us, one muttering, she's right, we looked it up after the 4th of July thing last year. Another whispered, Karen's done for this time. Whitaker opened his mouth, perhaps to de-escalate, but Karen got there first, snatching the manila folder from his hand. She jabbed a finger at the page and then at my wife. You think you can scare us because you've got a uniform? I don't care what you do for a living, this is my neighborhood too. And if you won't follow the rules, maybe we need to get someone here who can make you. She turned abruptly and snatched a phone from the teenager who'd been filming, hitting the screen to stop the recording. "Hey!" the teenager yelped. "That's my phone." Karen whirled on him. "Stop recording this. This is private HOA business." That broke the quiet. A neighbor across the street yelled back, "You can't just take someone's phone." Another stepped closer, phone camera still rolling. Whitaker tried to calm her down, but Karen was past the point of no return. "I'm calling the police," she shouted, clutching the teenager's phone like evidence. "I'm reporting you for harassment and violation of HOA rules." The teenager's mother stormed out from her driveway demanding the phone back. Karen refused, holding it high like a trophy. The small crowd started buzzing louder, voices overlapping. I felt my jaw tighten. My wife stepped off the porch and walked toward Karen, calm but deliberate, extending her hand. "Return the phone," she said, "and we can wait for the police together. If you don't, you're committing theft." Karen glared but didn't move. Her face was red, her breathing shallow. And then far off came the sound of a siren. The low, rising wail sliced through the chatter of the crowd and silenced everyone. Karen's grip on the phone tightened, but her mouth curled into a satisfied smile. "Good," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "Let's see whose side the sheriff takes." Police siren grows louder as a sheriff's cruiser turns into the neighborhood. Karen smirks, still holding the teenager's phone, sure she's about to win. The wail of the siren grew louder, echoing between the rows of tidy houses until it sounded like it was coming from every direction. Conversations died mid-sentence. Neighbors froze in place, their phones still raised. Even the teenager stopped reaching for his phone and took a step back, staring down the street. Karen was grinning now, a smug, victorious smile that said she thought the cavalry was coming for her. She adjusted her grip on the confiscated phone and squared her shoulders, ready to present her case. "Finally," she muttered, loud enough for all of us to hear. "Let's see how you explain this when the law gets here." I felt my stomach tighten, but I didn't move. My wife stayed rooted to her spot, hands loosely at her sides, expression calm but unreadable. It wasn't just the uniform, it was the way she carried herself, as though she had stood in tougher places and faced louder people than this. The sheriff's cruiser slowed as it turned into our street, tires crunching over gravel before pulling to a stop right in front of the house. The red and blue lights washed across the front lawn, making the flag glow like it was lit from within. The whole scene felt suddenly cinematic, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for the first line of dialogue. Deputy Sheriff Cole stepped out, adjusting his hat against the late afternoon sun. He was in his mid-40s, broad-shouldered, steady-eyed, the kind of man who looked like he'd seen every kind of neighborhood dispute before breakfast. Karen pounced before he could even shut his cruiser door. "Officer. Over here," she called, waving the phone like it was a flare. "They're violating HOA covenants, disturbing the peace, and they assaulted me by refusing to comply." Cole's brows furrowed slightly. He looked from her to us to the gathering crowd. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "who exactly assaulted you?" Karen pointed at me and then at my wife with a theatrical flourish. "Them. They've been threatening me ever since I told them to take that flag down. And she," Karen gestured wildly at my wife's uniform, "is trying to intimidate the neighborhood by dressing like some kind of soldier." A collective murmur rippled through the neighbors. One man snorted. A woman muttered, "She is a soldier." Cole didn't move toward Karen. Instead he walked straight toward me and my wife. "Afternoon," he said in a measured tone. "Can you tell me what's going on?" My wife stepped forward, the sunlight catching the brass on her collar. "Yes, Deputy. I'm Captain Reynolds, JAG Corps, United States Army. This flagpole is mounted on our private property in compliance with local code. Miss Karen here attempted to forcibly remove it and then confiscated a minor's phone when he tried to record her. She's now trespassing and escalating the situation." Cole's eyes flickered and I saw something shift behind them. Recognition, respect, maybe both. He nodded once, slow and deliberate. "Captain Reynolds," he said. "Thank you for your service." Karen's mouth fell open. What does that have to do with anything? She can't just play soldier to get out of following the rules. Cole turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to give that phone back." Karen hesitated. "This is evidence." "That's someone else's property," Cole said firmly. "Hand it over." Karen glared, but after a long moment she shoved the phone back at the teenager's mom, who immediately wrapped her arms around her son. "Now," Cole said, voice steady, "what exactly are the alleged violations here?" Whitaker, the HOA president, stepped forward, looking suddenly less sure of himself. There is a section in our covenants about unapproved exterior fixtures, he said, though his voice was quieter now. We just wanted to maintain neighborhood standards. Cole raised an eyebrow. Are you aware that federal law protects the right to display the American flag on private property? Whitaker shifted uncomfortably. Yes, but we thought. Thought or not, you can't enforce something that contradicts federal law, Cole said. That flag stays. Karen threw her hands up. Unbelievable. So they just get away with it? What's next? People putting up giant billboards on their lawns. Cole turned toward her, his voice dropping into that calm, no-nonsense tone law enforcement uses right before things turn serious. Ma'am, you called me out here for a flag that's legally displayed. You accused these homeowners of assault without evidence. You confiscated a teenager's phone. If you keep escalating, I'm going to have to consider whether you're the one disturbing the peace. The crowd murmured louder now, a mix of approval and quiet satisfaction. Karen's face turned the color of a ripe tomato. You can't talk to me like that. I'm on the board. I represent this neighborhood. Then you should know better, Cole said. The words hit like a hammer. Karen looked around desperately for support, but the neighbors who had gathered were no longer on her side. Even Whitaker took a small step back as though quietly distancing himself from her. You don't understand, Karen sputtered. If we let them keep that flag up, everyone's going to start breaking the rules. This neighborhood will fall apart. Cole didn't flinch. Ma'am, a flag on a porch is not a threat to public order. The quiet after that was deafening. Even the flag seemed to pause mid-billow. Karen's voice dropped to a hiss. This isn't over. Cole looked at her squarely. It might be if you keep going down this road, he said. You could be looking at harassment charges if this continues. Karen's eyes widened. Cole takes a step closer to Karen, hand resting casually near his cuffs. Ma'am, I'm giving you a warning right now. Back off, or this becomes a criminal matter. Karen's breath catches, frozen between retreat and doubling down, and the entire neighborhood waits to see what she'll do next. The sound of tires crunching over gravel snapped everyone's attention toward the street. A white county sheriff's SUV rolled to a stop right in front of my driveway, its amber lights flashing. Karen straightened up like she'd just won the lottery. There, she shouted, pointing at me as if she were in a courtroom delivering a closing argument. That's him. That's the man violating the HOA's flag ordinance. The sheriff's deputy stepped out, mid-40s, calm, tall, and broad-shouldered. His mirrored sunglasses reflected the entire chaotic scene. Karen with her arms crossed like she was about to conduct a citizen's arrest, my wife standing strong in her JAG Corps uniform, and me gripping the porch rail trying to stay calm. The deputy kept his voice even, professional. Ma'am, sir, I need to know what's going on here. Karen marched forward, nearly tripping over her own sandals. This man is flying an unapproved flag. The HOA doesn't allow anything but the standard. Karen, I cut in, it's the American flag. It's literally protected by federal law. You can't ban it. She whipped around, her face flushed. You don't get to lecture me on what this community allows. You signed the covenants when you bought this house. My wife finally spoke up, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut glass. Deputy, do you really get called out here for flags? The deputy shifted his weight and looked between us. Usually it's noise complaints or parking disputes. But the report said there was an escalating confrontation. Escalating? I laughed bitterly. She's the one who stormed my porch and tried to pull the flagpole out of the ground. Karen gasped dramatically. Lies. I was trying to uphold community standards. The deputy put his hand up. All right, let's take a breath. I'm going to need everyone to calm down. But Karen wouldn't let it go. She pointed at my wife. And who even are you to be lecturing me? This is a civil HOA matter. Not military business. That was the moment my wife took one step forward, standing tall in her uniform under the late afternoon sun. The deputy noticed the insignia on her chest, his eyebrows rising slightly. I'm Major Laura Bennett, she said evenly. Judge Advocate General's Corps, United States Army. And you're right, ma'am, this is a civil matter. Which means you don't have the authority to trespass on my property or harass us over a legally displayed flag. The air seemed to thicken. Even the neighbors who had been whispering on their porches went silent. Karen blinked, processing what had just been said. You're military? She said, her voice trembling between disbelief and fury. Yes, my wife replied. And I suggest you stop before you make this any worse for yourself. The deputy cleared his throat. Ma'am, she's correct. Federal law protects the right to display the U.S. flag in a residential setting. There's nothing here that violates the law. But Karen wasn't done yet. She stepped forward, her voice rising again. No. This is not how this works. She can't intimidate me with some costume. My wife didn't flinch. Uniform, she corrected, her tone still level but colder now. And I'm not here to intimidate you. I'm here to make sure you don't trample over our rights. The deputy finally stepped between us. All right, enough. Karen, you need to step back now. I'm not going to let this turn into a bigger issue. But Karen wasn't stepping back. She was shaking with rage. So you're taking their side? After everything I've done for this neighborhood? That's not what I said, the deputy replied, but she was already ranting about out-of-control neighbors and disrespectful newcomers. I glanced at my wife. Her jaw was set, but her eyes said she was about to go further. She hadn't even revealed everything yet. And that's when Karen made her worst mistake of the afternoon. She stepped onto our porch. Not the grass, not the sidewalk, the porch. That small step over the boundary line changed everything. My wife's voice cut through the air, sharp and commanding in a way that made everyone freeze. "Ma'am," she said, her tone suddenly carrying that unmistakable authority I'd only heard on base before, "you are now trespassing on federal property under my protection. Step back immediately." Karen froze mid-step. "What are you talking about?" she stammered. "This is my home," my wife said, her voice low but powerful. "You are not allowed here. Step back or I will take the next legal step." The deputy's hand went to his radio. "Karen," he said softer now, "you really don't want to push this any further." But Karen's face twisted. "She can't do anything. She's bluffing." That's when my wife reached into her pocket and pulled something out. Not her phone. Not her wallet. But her military ID. She held it up so the deputy could see it clearly, and he immediately nodded, his entire demeanor shifting from neutral to formal. "Understood, Major," he said. The neighbors gasped. Karen's face went pale. And then my wife spoke words that made everyone lean in. "Deputy," she said, her voice calm but carrying weight, "I am requesting that you document this as harassment and trespassing. We're not letting this slide." The deputy nodded. "I'll start the report." Karen's jaw dropped. "You wouldn't dare?" she started. "Oh," my wife said, finally letting a small smile slip, "try me." The deputy turned to Karen, pulling out his notepad. "Ma'am," he said, "I need your full name for the report." The entire street held its breath. Karen's face flushed a deep crimson, but for the first time all day she didn't have a comeback ready. The deputy flipped open his notepad, calm but unyielding. "Name, please," he repeated. Karen sputtered, looking around as if one of the neighbors might swoop in and rescue her. "This is ridiculous," she said, clutching the strap of her floral tote bag like a lifeline. "You can't put me in a report. I'm the one who called you." "That's exactly why we need your name," the deputy said matter-of-factly. "You initiated the complaint. It's standard procedure." My wife crossed her arms, still holding her ID in her other hand. "And now you've trespassed and harassed us. The report needs to reflect that too." Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. "This is a misunderstanding," she tried again. "I was just trying to enforce the HOA rules." "Ma'am," the deputy said, his patience thinning, "HOA rules do not override federal law, and they certainly don't give you the right to enter someone else's property without permission. If you keep refusing to cooperate, I'll have to escalate this further." A collective hush fell over the street. Even the neighbors who had been filming with their phones stopped whispering. "Escalate?" Karen asked nervously. "You mean?" "Yes, ma'am," the deputy said. "I mean a formal trespassing citation. Possibly worse, depending on what the homeowners want to pursue." Karen took a small step back off the porch, suddenly remembering where she was standing. Her face had gone pale, and she looked like she was calculating just how bad this could get. "This is insane," she muttered. "All this over a flag." "That flag," my wife said, pointing toward it, "represents the very freedom you're trying to take away from us. So yes, all this over a flag." The deputy scribbled something in his notepad, then looked up. "I have to document the incident either way. This goes into the system." Karen's eyes darted to the gathering crowd. The Johnsons from 2 doors down were openly filming now, their teenage son grinning like it was the best entertainment he'd had all summer. "This neighborhood has gone crazy," Karen hissed. "No, Karen," I said quietly, finally letting my own anger come through. "This neighborhood is just tired of you thinking you run it." Her head snapped toward me. "I am the HOA vice president," she snapped. "And you're about to be the former vice president if you keep this up," I shot back. The deputy raised a hand to stop the verbal crossfire. All right folks, I've got enough for the report. Here's what happens next. I'll file this with the county and you'll both get a case number. If there are further incidents, this documentation will matter. Karen looked like she might actually faint. Case number? She echoed. Like a criminal case? Not yet, the deputy said. But if this escalates again, there could be charges. My wife stepped closer, her tone calm but final. Deputy, I'd like to request that this report also be shared with the HOA board. This pattern of harassment needs to be formally addressed. The deputy nodded. I can do that. Karen whipped her head around. You can't involve the board. This is private. No, my wife said coolly. You made it public the moment you screamed at us in front of the entire street. The neighbors murmured their agreement. One older man even shouted from his porch, "About time someone stood up to you, Karen." Karen's jaw dropped. Excuse me? You heard me, he called back. You've been bullying everyone around here for years. Now you're getting a taste of your own medicine. The deputy turned toward Karen again, clearly done with the back and forth. Ma'am, this is your official warning. If you continue to harass the Bennetts or tamper with their property, we will move forward with charges. Karen swallowed hard. For the first time all day, she seemed to realize she wasn't winning this battle. This isn't over, she said through gritted teeth. No, my wife said evenly. It's just beginning. We'll see you at the next HOA meeting. Karen spun on her heel and stormed back toward her house, her sandals slapping against the pavement. The neighbors' phones followed her every step. When she was finally out of earshot, the deputy turned back to us. I'll send you the report number within the hour. If anything else happens, don't confront her, just call us. Thank you, deputy, my wife said, her professional tone softening for the first time. He nodded respectfully, glancing once more at her uniform. Major. As he walked back to his SUV, I turned to my wife. She's going to make this ugly, isn't she? I asked quietly. My wife's expression hardened again. Oh, she's not done. But now we have documentation, and I know exactly how to use it. The words sent a chill down my spine, not because I was afraid but because I could see the shift in her. This wasn't just about a flag anymore. This was about setting a precedent. And I had a feeling the next HOA meeting was going to be one for the history books. That night, as we were cleaning up the porch, my wife got an email. It was from the HOA board president. Subject line, "Emergency meeting, your attendance requested." The email from the HOA board president was short and to the point. Subject, "Emergency meeting, your attendance requested." Body, due to a serious incident reported earlier today, we are convening an emergency HOA board meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. at the clubhouse. Both parties involved are expected to attend. My wife read it aloud at the kitchen table, her expression calm but alert. She's trying to get ahead of this, I said, pacing across the tile. Good, my wife replied, setting her phone down. Then we get to address this on the record. She won't be able to spin it in her favor. The next day we arrived at the HOA clubhouse a few minutes early. The place was already buzzing. Word had clearly spread. Neighbors who hadn't shown up to a meeting in months were filing in, whispering and pointing. Karen was there too, sitting in the front row, her arms crossed like she was bracing for battle. She was dressed sharply this time in a pressed blouse and slacks, like she wanted to look professional. But I could see the storm brewing behind her eyes. The board president, Mr. Calloway, called the meeting to order. He was an older man with a measured voice, but even he looked uncomfortable. We've had an incident, he said, glancing at both Karen and us. This is unusual, but given that law enforcement was involved, we need to discuss it as a community. Karen shot her hand in the air immediately. I'd like to speak first, she said, standing without waiting for permission. Calloway hesitated, then nodded. Go ahead. Karen turned toward the room, her voice loud and indignant. I was only trying to enforce the rules that we all agreed to when we moved in here. The Bennetts have been openly defying the covenant by flying an unauthorized flag. Point of order, my wife interrupted calmly, standing to her full height. That statement is false. We are flying a United States flag, which is protected under the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005. Karen glared at her. Don't try to sound smart just because you wear a uniform. The room fell silent at that remark. Even the board president's eyebrows shot up. I'm not trying to sound smart, my wife said evenly. I'm stating federal law, which, incidentally, supersedes any HOA covenant you try to enforce. There was a low murmur among the neighbors. One woman whispered, she's right, My brother's in the Air Force and he told me the same thing. Karen's jaw tightened. This isn't about the flag anymore. This is about respect. They called the cops on me. I stood then, unable to hold back any longer. No, Karen. We didn't call the cops. You did. And then you trespassed on our property in front of half the neighborhood. Karen spun toward me. You're twisting things. Enough, Mr. Calloway said, holding up his hand. We have the deputy's report, and it clearly states that you crossed onto their porch after being asked to leave. That's a violation of property rights. Karen looked like she'd been slapped. You're taking their side? She demanded. I'm taking the side of the law, Calloway said firmly. Karen, this board can't defend actions that cross legal boundaries. The room buzzed again, neighbors shifting in their seats, some nodding in agreement, others whispering. My wife stepped forward, her voice calm but resolute. This isn't just about us. It's about setting a precedent. If one neighbor can harass another over a flag, a legal flag, and face no consequences, then what stops it from happening to someone else? A man from the back stood up. She's right. Karen, last year you tried to fine me for having my truck parked in my own driveway for one night. Karen whipped around. That was against the rules. Another neighbor chimed in. And you sent me 3 warning letters for having a kid's playset visible from the street. Soon, half the room was speaking at once, story after story of Karen's overreach spilling out like water from a burst dam. Karen was visibly sweating now, her composure slipping. This is a witch hunt, she shouted. No, Karen, Calloway said, his voice stern. This is accountability. Then my wife stepped forward again, and this time she pulled out the deputy's report and placed it on the table for everyone to see. This is what happens when unchecked authority goes too far, she said. We are formally requesting that the board censure Karen for harassment and trespassing. And we're asking for a vote tonight. The room went silent. Karen's head snapped toward Calloway. You can't do that. We can, he said, flipping through the bylaws. And we will if the majority agrees. Karen's breathing quickened. She was losing the room and she knew it. This isn't fair, she cried. You all know how much work I've put into this community. Exactly, my wife said softly. Which is why you should know better than to abuse that power. For a moment, Karen just stood there, trembling with rage. Then she pointed at my wife. You think you're untouchable just because you wear a uniform. But let's see how smug you are when I bring this up to the regional HOA council. The threat hung in the air, but instead of looking worried, my wife's lips curved into the smallest, calmest smile I'd ever seen her wear. That's a great idea, she said. Because I'd love to explain to them exactly how you tried to tear down a U.S. flag. On the record. Gasps rippled through the room. Karen's face went white. And then Mr. Calloway said the words that made every neighbor sit up straight. Board members, he said, I think it's time we call a vote. Karen's hands gripped the edge of her chair so hard her knuckles turned white. This isn't happening, she whispered, but the board secretary was already passing out ballots. The room had gone quiet enough to hear the scratch of the pens as the board members filled out their ballots. It felt like a courtroom, every eye in the room on the long folding table where the HOA board sat. Karen sat rigidly, her arms crossed so tightly her knuckles were white. She was trying to keep her composure, but I could see her foot tapping uncontrollably under the table. Mr. Calloway, the board president, collected the folded ballots one by one. He stacked them neatly, adjusted his glasses, and began opening them in front of everyone. Censure for harassment and trespassing, yes, he read aloud from the first. Karen's head jerked up. Second ballot, yes. She muttered something under her breath. Third ballot, yes. A wave of murmurs rippled through the neighbors. Karen slammed her hand on the table. This is a sham, she shouted, startling several people. You're railroading me because they don't like me. Calloway looked up, unamused. Karen, please remain quiet until the vote is finished. Karen pointed across the room at my wife, her voice rising. She's manipulating all of you. Can't you see it? She thinks just because she's military she can intimidate this entire board. My wife didn't even flinch. No one here is intimidated, Karen. They're just tired of being bullied. Fourth ballot, yes, Calloway read. Karen stood so suddenly her chair screeched against the floor. I will not sit here and let you smear my name. I have given 5 years of service to this HOA. I've organized events, written letters, enforced rules. And harassed your neighbors, someone called out from the back. Karen whirled around, her face beet red. Shut up, she shouted. The room erupted, neighbors whispering, phones recording. Karen looked cornered like an animal ready to strike. Fifth ballot. Yes, Calloway said, his voice cutting through the chaos. Karen's breathing had turned shallow. She turned back to Calloway. You can't do this to me. I am this neighborhood. If I go, this place will fall apart. Or it will finally breathe, someone else muttered. Karen looked like she might explode. She turned on me this time. And you, this is your fault. You could have just taken the flag down and avoided all of this. I stood slowly, meeting her glare. And what lesson would that teach? That the loudest person gets their way? No, Karen. That's not how this works. Sixth ballot, yes. The board secretary leaned in and whispered something to Calloway. He nodded, then faced the room. The vote is unanimous, he said. Karen, you are formally censured for harassment and trespassing. Effective immediately, you are removed as vice president of the HOA. For a moment, no one moved. Then the room erupted, a mix of gasps, cheers, and a few scattered claps. Karen stood frozen, her mouth open like she couldn't quite process the words. You can't remove me. I'll appeal this. I'll go to the regional council. Go ahead, Calloway said calmly. The report from the sheriff's office will go with it. That was the breaking point. Karen's face twisted, her voice cracking. You'll regret this, she spat, grabbing her purse. You've said that before, my wife said softly. Karen stormed out of the clubhouse, her sandals smacking against the linoleum floor with every furious step. The door slammed behind her so hard it rattled the windows. For a moment the room stayed silent, everyone absorbing what had just happened. Then one of the neighbors, the same man who'd spoken up about his truck, said loudly, "Well, that was long overdue." The room broke into nervous laughter and chatter. People began standing, talking to each other, shaking our hands. "You two did the right thing," one woman said as she passed us. "She's been out of control for years." My wife nodded, her professional calm still in place. "Thank you. But this doesn't end tonight. We'll need to make sure the harassment stops permanently." Calloway approached us as the room emptied. "For what it's worth," he said quietly, "you handled yourself with dignity tonight. I know this was uncomfortable, but it was necessary." My wife shook his hand. "I appreciate that. Hopefully this sets a precedent." As we walked out into the parking lot, the cool night air hit my face. The neighborhood felt different somehow, lighter, like a weight had been lifted. But my wife's expression was still serious. "She's not done," she said quietly. I glanced at her. "You think she'll try something else?" "She doesn't know how to back down," she said, getting into the car. "But next time we'll be ready." As we pulled into our driveway, our headlights swept across the front porch, and there it was. A folded piece of paper pinned to our flagpole. In big, angry letters it read, "This isn't over." The air outside our house felt thick, like every neighbor was holding their breath. The HOA president stood in front of Karen now, clearly frustrated. "Karen, you are making this worse. The HOA cannot override federal law, and certainly not military protections." Karen's face twisted into something almost feral. She pointed at my wife and shouted, "She's not special. I don't care what uniform she wears, this is my neighborhood too." You could see the shift in the officers. The polite patience was gone. One of them, the same officer who had asked my wife about her service, took a step forward and said, "Ma'am, you are interfering with a lawful investigation. You need to calm down or we will have to remove you." But Karen didn't calm down. She stormed toward my porch, muttering something about tearing down that flag herself. The officer quickly blocked her path, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Step back," he ordered, his voice firm. The whole street had gone completely silent now. You could hear a single bird somewhere in the distance, and then Karen said the words that would end this once and for all. "I don't care what the law says, I'll make her leave if I have to." And that was it. The officer immediately pulled out his cuffs. "Ma'am, you are under arrest for trespassing and making threats." Karen's scream echoed across the neighborhood as the cuffs clicked shut. The HOA president rubbed his forehead, clearly mortified by the whole scene. Neighbors were filming on their phones now, murmuring to each other about what had just gone down. But just when I thought this nightmare was finally over, Karen turned to the crowd, her face red with fury, and shouted, "You'll all regret this, you don't know who my brother is." I froze. My wife froze. The neighbors looked at each other nervously. Who was her brother? And why did it sound like a threat? Who do you think Karen's brother is? And could he actually make trouble for us after this? The neighborhood buzz turned into full-on chatter as Karen's words hung in the air. "Who's her brother?" someone whispered near the curb. "Probably bluffing," another neighbor muttered. But the look on Karen's face told me it wasn't just a bluff. She was daring everyone to find out. The officer finished cuffing her and led her toward the patrol car, but she kept shouting over her shoulder. "You all think you've won? My brother's on the county council. He'll shut this whole neighborhood down if he has to." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. One of the neighbors gasped. Another whispered, "She's not lying, her brother really is Councilman Green." That name made a few people exchange worried glances. I'd heard it too. He was known for being tough on code enforcement, sometimes using his position to target properties for violations. The HOA president's face went pale. "Oh no," he murmured under his breath. The arresting officer didn't flinch. "Councilman or not, she's still being charged tonight. We don't play politics out here." He put Karen into the back of the car, but you could feel that the damage had been done. My wife stepped down from the porch and walked straight to the HOA president. "If your board is afraid of political pressure, you should know the law protects service members and their families from harassment. If this councilman tries to retaliate, he'll be in violation of federal statute." Her words were calm, steady, but you could see some neighbors visibly relax as she spoke. She wasn't just defending herself, she was defending all of us. But then my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "This is Councilman Green," the voice said on the other end. "I suggest you tell those cops to let my sister go right now, or you'll regret it." My heart pounded. He sounded angry, but not just angry, confident. I looked at my wife, who immediately read the look on my face. "Put him on speaker," she said. And that's exactly what I did, right there in front of the whole neighborhood. Would you have the courage to put a threatening official on speakerphone in front of everyone? What would you say back to him? The phone speaker crackled, and Councilman Green's voice boomed loud enough for everyone to hear. "You think you can humiliate my sister? That flag is a violation, and if the HOA won't enforce it, I'll personally make sure you're cited until you move out." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The officer leading the arrest paused, listening carefully. My wife took one step closer to the phone, her posture perfect, her voice calm but cutting. "Councilman Green, this is Captain Sarah Miller, Judge Advocate General's Corps, United States Army. You just threatened a military family on a recorded line, in front of sworn law enforcement and witnesses. I strongly recommend you hang up before you escalate this into obstruction of justice." The silence that followed was deafening. Then a click. He hung up. The officer nodded, pulling out a body cam to confirm what we all knew. That call had been recorded. "That's enough for an official report," he said. "If he tries anything, this goes straight to the DA." Karen's rage had drained away, leaving her pale and quiet in the back of the cruiser. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, she didn't have a comeback. The HOA president turned to me, face flushed with embarrassment. "On behalf of the board, I'm sorry. This should never have gone this far. We'll make sure this flag is never questioned again." Neighbors applauded. Some even cheered. One older veteran down the street raised his hand in a salute toward my wife, who returned it with a respectful nod. As the cruiser drove away, taking Karen with it, the entire neighborhood felt lighter, as though someone had lifted a heavy cloud. People stayed out on their lawns talking quietly about what had just happened, about how maybe things would change now, that maybe Karen's reign of terror was finally over. Back on the porch, my wife finally let out a long breath. She turned to me and said, "I didn't want to use the uniform. But sometimes you have to remind people that there's a line they can't cross." I nodded, still gripping my phone, my heart finally slowing down. That night, as I sat under the very same flag that had caused all this trouble, I couldn't help but think about how fragile peace in a neighborhood can be, and how important it is to stand up for it. What would you have done if someone threatened to tear down your flag? Would you have fought back or stayed quiet? If you're watching this and you believe in standing up for what's right, even when it's hard, hit that like button. And maybe share this story with someone who's dealt with a Karen before. Because at the end of the day, good neighbors protect each other.